Welcome back, students, to labs number 18 and 19. We actually ended up combining these two labs due to the extended spring break. So we're going to start up with lab 18. Just note, this is actually probably going to be a little bit of a shorter lab either way. But today what we're going to be talking about is that meta-analytic review that you read on the ego depletion research. And it looked a little bit like this. So hopefully you read it. Now, we could spend some time summarizing it. Normally in class we would have a discussion, but rather instead we found this really nice video to kind of summarize the entire kind of ego depletion study and kind of some of the subsequent studies after that. So I'm going to go ahead and play this. Hopefully it works well for you all, but I'm going to play this video for everybody. So it should be on the next slide. So no big surprise, the video actually didn't end up working when I converted the PowerPoint to MP4, so I had to go back, and I provided the link here, but I'm also going to be providing the link on your module section for lab 18 and 19. If you want to go ahead and pause the video and watch the link that's provided in your module section. So hopefully you enjoyed that video. I thought it was really nice. It really kind of explained the entire study to me and the subsequent studies from there on and the meta-analyses as well. I'd like to kind of continue forward talking about another study that was analyzing the Hager et al. Ego depletion study, which was by Carter and McCullough. Don't worry, you weren't expected to read this. But anyways, this was conducted in 2014. And really, their entire point in this study is they also did kind of a meta-analytic review. However, they used some different regression-based techniques. And what they were trying to show is that even though we are seeing all this support for ego depletion across several different studies, what they're finding is that, well, these are all very small sample sizes, which I was actually really glad that a lot of you picked up on this from your last assignment where we talked about, what are some potential QRPs that were mentioned in that may have been come up in the ego depletion study is that, yeah, they're pretty small sample sizes, so the effects that we do see really might be these kind of biased effects. And that's what Carter and McCullough really were looking at. They've said that, hey, okay, even though there's hundreds of articles out here indicating that the ego depletion exists in this quick of amount of time, in this 15-minute time span, all of these studies had really small sample sizes. In fact, they even ran power analysis on all of these different studies and found the power was always extremely low across all these studies. So how can we really be so trustworthy of a series of low-powered studies that are being published? And as the video mentioned and was mentioned in the ego depletion meta-analytic articles, that there's likely publication bias that's happening right now. Of course, the small sample sizes that manage to show an effect are being presented and inflating the effect size of the actual ego depletion effect. So, I mean, what does this say? We have hundreds of studies indicating this to us, and now we're able to say, well, we can't even be sure. Well, there's been other meta-analytic reviews that have been done since then to indicate, okay, there is somewhat of an effect size, and we'll go into this a little bit more through the next slides, but to indicate, yes, there is some evidence, but clearly the effect sizes are drawn out, are inflated by a lot. So this Carter and McCullough study indicated that really this is a question of QRPs, and this entire ego depletion has at the entire base of it is all based off of questionable research practices and maybe even questionable measurement practices as well, as we talked about, that there's an overall this ego depletion effect size has been overestimated overall. So they don't want to say, and I want to end this slide off by saying they're not saying that the ego depletion effect doesn't exist. However, they're saying we should be a little bit weary of the results that we've seen because of these small sample sizes and low-powered studies that we can't really be sure. So it's not very convincing evidence. So perhaps it's there, but very low sample sizes and underpowered studies lead us to think that the effect isn't as large as they have mentioned before. And here's the hilarious part. Cunningham and Baumeister, the ones who originally did the ego depletion study, well, of course, they got a little upset over their work being questioned and saying that the overall ego depletion effect is very small or non-existent overall. So we kind of have to sit here, and I love this idea of, and I think I went over this in class, how excited it gets me when people are fighting in the scientific literature, because suddenly things become not so civil, which I need to tell you now. We will have a lecture on civil discourse in the academic literature, but that's for another lecture. But essentially, they were not very happy with this decision that was coming about from the meta-analytic reviews. And they said that they didn't think that overall these meta-analytic reviews were very good. They said that they overestimate the publication bias. These include a series of questionable decisions that involve sampling methods and data analyses. So just to let you know, they were not a very fond of it. And additionally, another thing that Cunningham and Baumeister in 2016 said in response to this article is that they didn't appropriately operationalize this construct overall. So they're saying that that the meta-analytic reviews did a terrible job overall. So this just kind of shows you that academics can get pretty rough at times. People can get mad. To me, maybe it's because I've always been standing on the outside of it, but I think it is actually hilarious in a sense. But there's a little bit of mean civil discourse that happened from this meta-analytic review. So after Baumeister's kind of response to the meta-analytic review, another researcher fairly recently in 2018, so just a couple years ago, did an updated meta-analysis in which this researcher, Dang, they actually ended up like kind of focusing away from some of the regression-based approaches that McCullough and Carter found to indicate the weaker effect sizes and the lowly powered sample sizes. And what they did is said, look, maybe there's some places where ego depletion is more apparent than other places. So what they found is overall, the weaker effects. So they said, okay, look, working memory, multiple depleting tasks, and attention to video, it doesn't seem to be really focusing in on that. So ego depletion doesn't seem to be related to that. However, if we kind of get into some other things that are a little bit more, cognitively demanding tasks, such as attention essay, crossing out letters, the food temptation, so the radishes and the cookies and so forth, these seem to be a little bit stronger of effects overall. So this is kind of the in-between the ego depletion originally studied by Baumeister, and then additionally the kind of going against the ego depletion study by McCullough and saying, okay, look, there's some places where we can see ego depletion having an effect, and some places that it clearly doesn't have an effect. And they overall just went and focused on that. And like I said, this is actually a pretty short lab, so we're already in our summary stage. So I guess I want you to just go ahead and reflect back on kind of what you're thinking of. I mean, you've had a lot of readings to do, including if we include lab 19 and what the readings were, but what do you think? Do you think ego depletion is real? Do you think there's a real effect? I'm a bit of a skeptic, honestly. Sometimes I really question the reality of ego depletion, and if it exists, like how strong an effect is it really having on us? I really like the ideas from the video about, maybe it's our perception of ego depletion, right? If I believe that it's this unlimited resource, then maybe I will continue on, have less procrastination, and not become fatigued overall from it. That's kind of what my kind of general thought is. Maybe you agree, maybe you disagree. There's kind of a lot of evidence going both ways for that. Maybe we should be teaching everyone that ego depletion, that it's not a depleted resource, so that they will have better outcomes overall. I'm not sure, but it's kind of what I think. But this is just to show you, some of the literature and how contradicting literature always happens, and how these lowly powered studies have really had a bad name in social psychology in the way that they've come about. Next, we have meta-analytic reviews with different conclusions, right? So we have the one by Dang in 2018 that said, look, there's some evidence of ego depletion in its existence, and then the McCullough study that said, look, this is not true at all. Like, even though we're seeing hundreds of studies indicating this, you can't be trustworthy of these studies, and the effect sizes are so overestimated. So which is the correct meta-analytic review? Um, and then, of course, my obvious favorite, as you can tell, as I get excited whenever I read some sort of civil discourse between two academics in which Baumeister and colleagues were not very receptive to the challenges from this. So we're going to go ahead and continue over to lab number 19. Now, this one's going to be even shorter than lab number 18. So go you, even though I will say lab number 18 and 19 probably had the most amount of readings. So one of the reasons that this is going to be so short is that we were going to have a lot of discussion about those readings. However, now we're kind of bringing those discussion into that quiz that you were mentioning. I don't know if you like that more or less, but either way, it's kind of where we're at. So let's go ahead and get started with lab number 19. I'm really just going to mention a little bit about Baumeister's response a little bit to the ego depletion theory. And we're actually going to watch a quick video about his response to the meta-analytic reviews and people questioning his research on ego depletion. So as I said, we're actually going to really dig into detail more about Roy Baumeister's response to the failures to replicate his ego depletion study and the kind of presentation that there's obviously some sort of publication bias that's occurring and your small sample sizes are not really helping the case. So Roy Baumeister actually ended up writing an appendix for a book where he presents a lot of his thoughts on the failure to replicate the ego depletion studies. And actually, after this slide, we're going to be watching a 5-minute video on his response overall. And really, though, it's kind of a couple of things that he mentions, just to summarize somewhat briefly. About the attacks that he's felt towards his ego depletion research is, first of all, a lot of people have kind of proposed alternative theories saying, look, there might be something going on, but let's talk about other theories other than the ego depletion as the main theory that would explain the fatigue overall. Additionally, there's a lot of people out there who are questioning whether or not the ego depletion exists at all, and especially at this low time interval of just between given the choice of whether to eat radishes or eat cookies, how much ego depletion has come from there. So, and additionally, he calls this replication brouhaha, in which he thinks that this creates more a perception of dishonesty than there is. So it might be that he thinks that these researchers have made it so he seems extremely dishonest and so forth, but he's really attacked more so the methods that these meta-analytic reviews and other studies that have kind of quote-unquote attacked his research have done. So he really questions, that they had bad research designs, they were working on the wrong populations, and that really that these null results can mean several things beyond that of the kind of overall like distrust towards ego depletion. So he's pretty apparent that he thinks that this is a real effect. He thinks that his study is real. I mean, I'm curious what you all think. Do you think that this ego depletion is real, or do you think it's not? I mean, with so much competing literature, how can we really be sure, especially when he reached effect sizes that are so large, but at the same time, we know a lot about power now and how that relates to things. So I mean, do you think he has a good argument? Do you think that really he just found all of his statistical significant results by chance? Do you think he maybe even worked in some questionable research practices, or what? That's kind of the main thing. So now I'm going to go ahead and just lead it off to a video again. This is just a 5-minute video of actually Baumeister himself talking about the study and his perceptions, kind of more talking a little bit more in detail about what this slide is all about. So class is another point where the video was not working when I converted it to MP4 file format and uploaded it to YouTube. So I'm finding this out after I created the presentation. So instead, if you go to your module section for lab 18 and 19, there will be a video link provided there, and you'll see a video of a 5-minute video of Baumeister kind of presenting his views on the findings. So I thought that last video was a little bit humbling, coming straight from Baumeister himself, indicating the areas that he kind of agreed with, disagreed with, but he clearly doesn't think that ego depletion is done overall. He thinks that because it's been replicated so often. Despite what some of the meta-analytic reviews indicate about publication bias and small sample sizes, he really does believe that it exists and that that's not going away soon. Although he accepts that there are definitely reasons for alternative theories. It was quite humbling, I thought. I thought it was a really good kind of approach, even though I think originally he was a little bit, eager to say that his results are real and everyone else is false. He's definitely kind of toned down a little bit. Now, just to this is kind of the last slide before our summary slide, but just to show there's been some other pre-registered replication attempts. So, as we're learning in this class, these pre-registered studies hopefully are the more trustworthy studies that we can go for that, don't change up their hypotheses. There's no harking, no cherry picking of that. Those are some terms that we've learned previously. So really, overall, just this first study by Lurkin et al. In 2016 really found no effect of ego depletion at all. So therefore, they say, nope, this doesn't exist. Vos et al. Found significant findings, but were smaller than the original study, which seems to be more likely the case that maybe this does exist, but to a smaller degree. And Dang et al., you may have recognized that name from earlier, where they from lab number 18, where they mentioned the kind of where it works, where ego depletion works in some cases, but not in other cases. They were apparently able to kind of replicate Baumeister's findings overall. So again, it's mixed findings, and these are all pre-registered replications, and it's still mixed findings. So I think that comes to our question at the end of the day is how do we kind of parse out what's real and what's not, especially in social psychology when we're dealing with such small effect sizes overall. How are we able to kind of parse that out? Now, for next lab, we want you to actually watch a video by Amy Cuddy. It's a TED Talk, and then also read this New York Times article for us.